All right. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 8th reoccurring public meeting for the GSA FAC Policy and Practice Subcommittee. My name is Stephanie Hardison, and I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Officer, along with the Designated Federal Officer, Mr. Boris Aratia. Boris?
No, welcome everybody again. We are coming up on our 6-month anniversary of this committee being in existence. So really excited for today's events. Got a lot of great speakers as well, a lot of work to do. So excited. Back to you, Stephanie.
We would just like to mention that this is a virtual public meeting that is being recorded, and today's information and material will be posted to our website. At this time, we will begin a roll call. Luke?
Here.
Richard?
Here.
Leslie?
Present.
Mr. Doss? Mr. Hayden?
Here.
Mamie? Amlan? Ms. Romer?
Here.
Steve? Schooner? Stacy? Nigel?
Here.
Anish? Dr. Wager?
I'm here.
And Dr. Wise. At this time, I'll turn it over to the chairs. Steve, Luke.
Sure, I'll go first. Good afternoon, everybody. It's been an exciting few weeks as we are gearing up for some pretty exciting developments all around. Many of us are looking forward to our May 4th meeting, which will be in person at the GSA in Washington, D.C. for whomever can make it. Hopefully everybody can make it. We're really working hard to make it a milestone event and hope to deliver important updates and reports on our progress with an anticipated final position on single-use plastics. I really look forward to seeing and meeting many of you and getting a better understanding of the GSA and the staff that may ultimately feel the weight of any recommendations that we make. At the conclusion of our speakers today, we'll hopefully have a few minutes to debrief and discuss our current recommendations, where we stand, next steps for each. And since we have a packed agenda today, I'm going to kick it to the speakers and ask Steve if he has any additional words.
The only thing I wanted to say is I want to again thank Luke for shouldering far more than his share of the burden. Thanks to the GSA team for everything, and I really appreciate having the speakers today. But again, let's get down to business. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. Our first speaker is John Kostiak, a principal at Kostiak Strategies and a Ceres consultant. He's going to be talking to us about the FAR Council's proposal in FAR Case 2021-15. John, are you able to talk?
I am, but I'd like to give a moment for my colleague, Leslie Cordes, to say a word or two.
Sure.
Thanks, John. I know we want to get to the meat of the presentation, so I don't want to slow things down, but just want to recognize John for his work really leading series work to update the FAR to address climate change. He's been extremely helpful in this work, and it's really a pleasure to share his expertise with his group. I think you'll all find it very informative. Would just like to say, for those who are interested in this work, interested in the comment process and in being part of kind of a broader discussion, please reach out to myself or John after this presentation. We're happy to talk further about any of the contents. So back over to you, John.
Thank you, Leslie. And thanks to my GSA friends for this opportunity to talk about the FAR Council's proposal. I'm just stepping out of the Buy Clean Summit, where I had the pleasure of hearing Administrator Carnahan give a really compelling address, and I also got to bump into Jenna Wong in the hallways and saw Stacy, your committee member, lead an excellent panel. So I've been immersed in climate-related procurement for a good part of the day. I have to say, addressing climate risk in federal supply chains is a big job. And groups like this FAC really will be critical to getting those policies right. I look forward to today's discussion. I'll try to keep my opening presentation as short as possible so we can get to the discussion. Next slide, please. I'm going to say just a brief word about Ceres. really because it has been playing a key leadership role in helping the federal government reduce climate-related financial risk in our economy. And what makes Ceres unique is its partnerships with many companies and investors that agree on the need for priority attention to climate risk. And you can see from this slide, there's 70% of the Fortune 500 in Ceres' company network, 60 trillion assets under management in the investor network. On to the next slide, please. So before I discuss the details of the FAR Council proposal, I want to call attention to the historic importance of this first ever serious attempt to look at greenhouse gas emissions across all of federal supply chains. Global emissions are still increasing despite decades of warnings from climate scientists. And this new policy essentially recognizes that these emissions increases are a big problem for the basic operations of our government. And private sector leaders and other national governments have been working on supplier emissions for a while now, and so we have a lot to learn from them. CVS, Microsoft, General Motors, Lenovo are among the private companies that are already requiring emissions disclosures. So in one sense, the federal government's playing a little bit of catch up here. On to the next slide, please. So here's the information the federal government will be collecting once the rule is finalized. Some disclosures will be due 1 year following the rule's effective date. Most of them will be due 2 years thereafter. Now, you can note that much of this information, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of work is happening in the private sector on this already. So much of this information that is being sought by the federal government is already in the hands of its large contractors. Not all, but a significant part. And so we have companies that are already well schooled in calculating emissions, assessing climate risk, setting targets. And that's in response to pressure from investors and policymakers and for their own risk management purposes. On to the next slide, please. So the FAR Council was careful when it crafted this proposal with an eye toward avoiding unnecessary burdens. And I just wanted to highlight in this slide a few of the features that are aimed at ensuring that this, at least for this starting point, for the first time to sort of take a broad look at the federal supply chains from a climate perspective, that the FAR Council is proposing to start really just a subset, but a really important subset of the federal contractor base. So the contract requirements are limited to the largest contractors, those with the biggest contracts, and it's roughly 1% of total contractors registered in the SAM database. The other thing that the government is doing, the FAR Council is doing this proposal to really minimize costs and ease burdens, is to tap into the work that's been going on for the past decade or two, led by private sector entities like the UN's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and CDP, the disclosure entity that works with so many private sector companies, and the GHG Protocol, and the Science Based Targets Initiative. So that's a really critical element of this proposal. There are also a number of exceptions and waivers that are really designed to try to avoid it to the greatest degree possible unfair, unintended outcomes, such as duplicative reporting obligations and interfering with the performance of the agency's missions. If you go on to the next slide, please. So this is probably, if you're want to get into the weeds of this proposal, this is how I would try to summarize it in one piece of paper. And it doesn't have everything, and we will certainly, during our discussion phase, wanted to get into other details in this proposal. But here's a way to look at it. And it was Ceres that developed this tier structure. So it's not an official terminology that's used in the proposal itself, but it's how we broke down the requirements of the proposal. And what it does is, again, shows how it's a graduated approach based upon the size of the business that the contractor is doing with the federal government. So 490,000 or so entities will have to do one very small step, indicate whether or not they are getting, in the previous fiscal year, more than $7.5 million worth of federal business. And if so, then they check yes. Otherwise, they check no. And so the vast percentage, roughly 99%, are basically kicked out at that point, minimal obligations. So the next tier is disclosure of scope 1 and 2 emissions. And for those of you who are not on top of the GHG protocol and the methodologies that have been used to calculate greenhouse gas emissions, very simply, scope 1 is the direct emissions from your operations. Scope 2 are indirect emissions that come from the purchase of electricity or heat. So as you can see from the second and third columns here, that only captures a small percentage of companies or contractors, I should say entities. The FAR Council estimated somewhere around 4.8 thousand. And again, these are the ones that have a significant amount of business with the federal government, roughly 7.5 million or more of business in the previous fiscal year. And there are a number of contractors that are kicked out from that requirement. 5 different categories are kicked out, such as tribal entities, state and local governments, higher education institutions, M&O contractors such as DOE labs, and the like. Nonprofit research institutions would be the 5th. There are 2 other categories that are put in this tier 2 minimal scope 1 and 2 disclosure tier, and those are those who are already doing 50 million or more of business with the federal government each year, but they're small businesses as designated by SBA and nonprofits. So that tier 3 is perhaps what I would call the meat of this FAR Council proposal. This is where the federal government really gets robust information. Scope 1 and 2 emissions, as well as scope 3. So scope 3 are essentially all those indirect emissions other than electricity and heat. It's essentially the supply chains as well as the customer base. So what is oftentimes referred to as the value chain of a company. If you look at the research on where the emissions come from, the vast majority of large companies, their emissions are in scope 3, not in scope 1 and 2. So it's a critical part of understanding a contractor's emissions. The other 2 components are climate risk assessments. This is essentially pursuant to recommendations that have been developed and are broadly embraced by this task force on climate-related financial disclosures. And finally, science-based targets. Now, what does a FAR Council mean by science-based? For those of you who follow Paris and follow climate science, you'll be very gratified to know that the FAR Council got this right. They characterize science-based targets as emissions reduction targets that's aligned with the Paris Agreement and follows the science. The validation would come from the Science-Based Target Initiative, essentially to confirm that targets are science-based. I think I'll stop there. But again, here's the most important thing, perhaps for those who are worried about potential too much burden on contractors. Look at the tiny percentage of the federal contractor base that would be subject to these key requirements. So 0.3% of the entire registered contractor base. Let's go to the next slide. So this is, again, a critical slide to understand, because, and I really want to help us think, help you if you're not already immersed in the world of climate risk, to understand each of these 3 concepts. So I'm just going to speed past this, just do this slide as sort of the introductory one. And the next 3, I'm going to walk through a little bit of discussion of physical risk at the company level or entity level, transition risk at the entity level, and that one is often referred to as systemic climate risk. So next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about physical risk. We're experiencing it every day, unfortunately. Climate change is now very present. It's no longer in the future. If you look at the growth of billion-dollar climate-related disasters, go on to NOAA's website, you can see the statistics. It's pretty frightening. We have gone from we've gone from 3 per year average in the 1980s to 20 billion-dollar climate-related disasters per year in the past 3 years. So it's, and the trend line is not looking positive. We'll be seeing more and more of these climate-related disasters, the acute ones. Now, obviously, there's also the chronic ones like desertification, sea level rise, glacier melt, and the like. But even just the acute ones have enormous impacts on the federal supply chain, as I'm sure you're well aware, but just to give some obvious examples from these photos. Last year, we had well, of course, we're experiencing a mega drought across the West in the United States, fueled by climate change in part. And last year, we saw a very significant drought in the Mississippi River that interrupted shipping in a dramatic way, an economic havoc across the U.S., and I'm sure it affected several federal suppliers. Similarly, we had Hurricane Ian in Florida, the 2nd largest insured loss in U.S. history after Katrina, which was another climate-related disaster. So these are happening now seemingly on a daily basis around the world. And this rule is designed to give the federal government a better window into this problem so it can devise solutions. So are contractors prepared for intensifying floods, wildfires, droughts, and other climate impacts? The answer is we don't know. We will not know until this rule is finalized. Can procurement policies be updated to strengthen our resilience to these kinds of physical impacts? The answer is absolutely yes, but how you design that policy really is going to have to be informed by these disclosures. And for those who haven't seen it, the Council of Economic Analysis just put out 2 wonderful reports in the past few weeks, the economic report of the president and a white paper on climate risk that I strongly encourage you taking a look at. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about transition risk to entities. If you think about the history of our industrial development as a global economy, it's been built on fossil fuels. And so we have entire supply chains of the federal government that are resting on a foundation of fossil fuel infrastructure that are soon to be outmoded due to the arrival of much cheaper and much cleaner technologies. An example on this page would be electric vehicles. All the smart analysts are saying internal combustion vehicles are functionally extinct. They're on their way out. So just like Kodak failed to grapple with the arrival of the digital camera and Blockbuster failed to grapple with the arrival of DVDs by mail and streaming video, there are firms, we don't know what percentage in the federal supply chains that will go out of business due to failure to grapple with the rapidly decarbonizing economy. Which ones? We don't know. How will the federal government know unless it secures the kinds of disclosures that this proposal calls for? So, and then at that point, the federal government can develop strategies and policies for strengthening preparedness for this rapidly decarbonize the economy. There may be technical assistance or other incentives to provide existing valued contractors to help them get ready and get them out of climate denial, which unfortunately is a problem that plagues our country. On to the next slide, please. So systemic risk, I have to say this is one of the issues that motivates me to work on this issue every single day. We have had now a body of literature developed, and fortunately, we now have leaders of government that are talking about us, such as Secretary Yellen in Treasury, that are essentially saying that climate change is a financial stability risk. So procurement policy, where does that fit into this? Well, federal government, as the largest purchaser of goods and services in the world, has a significant contribution to adding to that systemic risk, increasing the risk of that financial crash that economists are predicting may be coming thanks to climate change. So if we are going to head that off, the federal government at very minimum, and this is just one of many steps it needs to take to deal with that systemic risk, should be looking at its own business and seeing what contributions it's making and how it can reduce those contributions. So we don't know what level of preparedness the big contractors have on both transition and physical risk. But in addition to looking at that at a company level or entity level, the government should be looking at that at a systemic level. What is the cumulative problem here? And are we setting ourselves up for that green swan event, that big, rapid, widespread asset deflation that is analogous to what happened in the 30s, what happened in 2008? We read the economists who study financial crashes. They expect them to become increasingly prevalent. We need to be ready, get a little flavor of it, what happened with the pandemic, but that was really just a taste compared to the potential disruption of supply chains we may be seeing from climate change. So this is our big opportunity to get our arms around this problem. Next slide, please. So I've been talking mostly up to this point about risk reduction. But what also makes this issue so exciting to work on, and I have to say I should be talking about it more because this is more inspiring, is the opportunity. Some people call it climate-related opportunity. And I would call it the opportunity of the FAR Council to strengthen our economy with a focus on those companies who are poised and ready to implement sustainable business practices. McKinsey estimated that the net zero by 2050 goal, if it were implemented, would provide investment opportunities around the range of $9.2 trillion per year from 2023 to 2050. There are many other estimates at that level, and they keep on getting more exciting as new policies come into play, such as the Inflation Reduction Act And I just saw yesterday, EU just passed a major new renewable energy policy to try to match what the United States is doing. I love that kind of competition. So this is our moment. This is our moment to transform our economy. Like I indicated earlier, I had the pleasure of attending today the Buy Clean Summit, and the speakers, including Administrator Carnahan, were just inspiring in terms of the opportunity to create union jobs, to revitalize our manufacturing base, to essentially improve our environment and our economy and build this coalition of NGOs, the public sector, and industry all moving in the same direction. And here's our opportunity. But again, we need a good data, a base of solid data on which to form this strategy. I'm giving short shrift to what I would call enormous issues: the national security benefits of transitioning off of carbon-intensive fuels. We've heard many leaders from our defense sector, and this is critical, especially considering the participation of DoD and the FAR Council and the major role that DoD contractors play in our procurement system, with more than half of federal procurements. So this is another really important reason to get moving on this. And finally, again, not everything's about money. I have to say, I started in my career and spent most of my career working on biodiversity conservation, only shifted to climate when I met with people like Tom Lovejoy, who helped educate me on the devastation that's going to be happening to the world's biodiversity from climate change. And so this is yet another benefit of moving forward on this proposal. Huge environmental public health benefits. Every inch we're able to move this down the field. Next slide, please. And this is my last one. I'm really looking forward to getting to the conversation part of it. I have, and working with my series colleagues, just completed an analysis. It was sent over to the FAR Council today. A review of all 18,986 comments that were submitted on this proposal as of the February 13th deadline. Now, fortunately, most of those were template letters. We didn't really have to read those. But 132 were the organizational comments that we gave the greatest focus, by far the most focus in our analysis. And I was really pleased, we were really pleased to see the results of this analysis, which essentially said majority of commenters are strongly supportive of moving forward, including, you'll be very happy to hear, a plurality of the private sector commenters. And then once you remove the carbon intensive businesses that commented, a strong majority of private sector commenters are supporting this proposal. 31 of those non-carbon intensive sectors supportive versus 14 negative. And of course, the NGO community came out strongly in favor. So, and I want to clarify here, and this is my final point. What does support mean? We have a lot of really smart people offering their wisdom on this proposal. Most of them, many of them, including Ceres, did not simply say rubber stamp, go, do this. We gave a lot of thought to this proposal and offered constructive suggestions for improvement. I lift 5 key issue areas here at the end of this slide on ones that are discussed in our analysis, how the different commenters address them, and ways to potentially tweak this proposal to ensure its effective implementation. So I'm not going to read them to you. You can see them before you. Last slide is my thanks to you for this opportunity. Thank you for your really important work on this committee. And I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to tee it up for questions now. Steve, I think you've got a couple to start off with. Go for it.
Yeah, so first, John, thanks so much. Second, I'm dying to actually see a copy of whatever you sent over with regard to the summary. So if
I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, that would be superb. The one thing that I thought you didn't talk about in the slides is, one of the things that you and I have gone back and forth on before, and that's the operational rubric of the rule. So you and I may agree that disclosure is a good thing. But I guess I'd appreciate it, and then, we can go in a number of different directions there, but if you could say a word about how the rule works from for example, a FAR Part 9 or the binary, I disclosed or I didn't, and what that means. And then also, any thoughts or insights you have about the rule that we may see as early as a month from now, the operational procurement rule. And again, not hiding the ball for everyone else, I've long advocated that the order should have been reversed, but that's now water over the dam. But in any event, John, again, thanks, but I'm dying to hear what you have to say.
Steve, that is a really excellent question. Series dealt with that in its comments toward the end. You have to get through our lengthy comment letter. We believe strongly, like you do, that this can't be the only step that the FAR Council takes to update the FAR to deal with climate change. But we do believe this is an important first step. And here's why. Information is power. Information moves markets. We have seen that many times. And in trying to understand how to give a framework to contracting officers that they can use, will the data that gets submitted by these contractors be enough? Probably not, because there's some very sector-specific data. As we know, in the industrial materials section, environmental product disclosures is a huge deal. So what we're suggesting here is this is one component of a larger data set that procurement officials need to have in front of them. But this is operating at what you might call the strategic level. How do we gather information to inform the next generation of procurement policy and strategy? And that's really where this is at. It's not going to answer every single question about how to adjust the bid requirements. We can't do all that at once. That's going to take a series of steps. So recognizing that all policy is made on the margins, you have to take one step at a time. Our approach is let's get this big win and let's go for some of those other ones. And I agree that other FAR case, 2021-016, is right up there as a really big priority for series as well.
Mark, get your hand up.
Thank you for that. This will make Stephen head for under the desk probably, but when I was in COP26, I was asking one of the universities if there was a way to devise a carbon rating number on products. I know it doesn't include services, that's another discussion. And Lever Brothers said they were headed that direction to put that on all their products so that a consumer, I understand that's consumer level and not our group, but can tell and communicate what are the legitimate products that should be identified in an RFP or an ITB or some other procurement method. Are we close to that? Does something exist? Where are we at?
Well, there are others in this call who probably can talk about some of the past exercises like Energy Star and others. But I do want to flag for everyone that there is an RFI out there right now. EPA is doing an eco-label focus on this issue. Or they're asking for input on building the first sort of modern eco-label that addresses everything we were talking about here today. And it's probably, I would imagine, going to be in that realm of industrial materials, the construction materials, because that is such a gigantic priority of this administration. I'm saying that because I just came out of the Buy Clean Summit, and a lot of heavyweights showing up for that meeting. But there could be many more. I do agree that's one approach, because obviously many customers do not have the bandwidth to study up on climate science and carbon accounting. So having somebody do the homework with an open source data sources and methodology, and basically a broadly embraced methodology, that's where the game is at. So I would agree with the premise of your question.
Thanks, Mark. David, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation. And I thought it was really interesting, the physical risk, the transition risk, and systemic risks that you pointed out. And this is kind of a hypothetical, but I'm concerned that there could be a company, a provider of products that has, they've minimized their scope 1 and scope 2. Their scope 3 is, the 95th percentile low. However, their supply chain is vulnerable because maybe they get material through a railroad track that could be flooded out, or a river that could dry out, so they can't move their material or get their supply chain to deliver materials. And I'm just trying to think, how would we evaluate somebody based on those considerations when all of their greenhouse gas emission data have nothing to do with the actual risk entailed in their product?
That's a really great question, David. And I have to say, this is an important thing, I believe, for this committee and for all the other leaders who are working in this space to emphasize. This proposal does not say you get denied a federal contract if some climate risk surfaces in your disclosure. And so that is one of the reasons why I am a believer of getting this information on the table for the federal government to really start homing in on particular issues. There are so many issues, including risk factors that are beyond your control. So, but it would lead to strategic judgments that I think are going to be critical, which is diversifying locations, diversifying shipping routes, diversifying contractors. Resiliency is all about diversification, right? And many facets of diversification. So I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that because of the disclosures that this rule would produce, that some business gets kicked out. The only way you suffer a negative consequence for this rule is if you simply refuse to disclose. Then I'm really gratified, because this is what makes it different, pardon me, from the Obama era climate disclosure rule, which was you were essentially told that if you fill out this form and say you're not disclosing anything, that's good enough. This is fundamentally different. This is saying you have one fundamental responsibility: give us information, and that's it.
Right. If I may take the prerogative of follow-up question,
Yeah.
It seems like some of these issues were also entailed in the SEC's ESG rule.
Mhm.
And did you look at sort of the consistency between the two? I've heard in various forums about I have to report in this format for this rule, and maybe in this format for that rule, and other kinds of reporting platforms.
Yes.
Just curious whether you've looked at that.
Yeah, and there's actually multiple SEC rules, right? The main one you're probably alluding to is the climate risk disclosure rule. There's another ESG funds rules. So I'm working on those as well. And I could not agree more that the more we can align these disclosure methodologies, that's what I was alluding to earlier at the beginning of the presentation. We have some private sector actors that have created a framework that many, many private companies would like to operate in rather than reinventing the wheel. And so to the extent the federal government to grab onto those frameworks, there are technical details on how to do that. But there needs to be a way to align and create some incentives for companies to participate in those standard setting exercise, recognizing that if you do it here and satisfy the FAR Council, you're going to satisfy the SEC, you're going to satisfy UK, Canada. I have to say the number of other national governments that are working on emissions disclosures and other forms of climate risk disclosures is growing by the day. And so every major company should be embracing this and saying, yeah, I want to be inside the tent and making sure there's a standardized methodology.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll follow up until I see some more yellow hands get raised. So a couple for you to riff on, John. One is, can we talk a little bit about SBTI? So one grumble I heard during the comment period was that SBTI won't deal with, for example, extractive firms. They simply won't service them. And I don't know if that's true or not, but obviously there were some domestic people who were complaining that SBTI wasn't American and the like, but any thoughts on, I mean, as you know, I favor the whole SBTI rubric, but any thoughts on that would be great. And then along those lines, but a little different, there's all these grumblings that the GHG protocol is going to revamp the scope 3 rubric. So thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, Steve, and those are excellent questions. And you might have noticed that I sort of flagged those on my last slide as issues that were very prominent in the comments file. They are solvable issues in our view. We don't want to scuttle all the incredible work that's been done at SBTI and GHG protocol. But we did see comments from people who said, well, oil and gas sector, they don't have a guidance for oil and gas sector, SBTI. And then there are some people who would rather GHG protocol did scope 2 a little bit differently. As you probably have heard, GHG protocol is going through an update process right now, trying to prioritize changes. And so these are moving targets, and as well they should be. This is complex stuff. And so these standard setting bodies, some people refer to them as, are going to be changing. And so when we series crafted our comments, we looked at that and said, well, maybe what we need to do is have the federal government set the standards and then give some flexibility to contractors to decide which entity they want to work with on meeting those standards. So if you're an oil and gas company and SBTI doesn't work for you, okay, find somebody else to say you have a science-based target. That's fine. We're trying not to overprescribe this because we want to get this thing to the finish line and recognize that there's always going to be somebody who's going to have some question about some methodology, and that's just not gum up this entire rulemaking. Best thing to do is create some federal standards here and then let people go out there and find, as long as it meets two basic requirements in our mind, is broadly accepted and science-based.
And see no more hands. I'm going to push back on one more. So again, this goes back to the, chicken before the egg, this rule and the next rule. One of my criticisms of this is that the contracting officer doesn't really have to do anything for a couple of years now, right? Your average 1102 can literally just sit back and wait, because all of this has to be implemented, all the reporting has to be done. And the rule itself is fundamentally a responsibility rule. As you said, I check the box that I have done the assessment, disclosure, and targeting. That's it.
True under the FAR, Steve, but what I really want to point everybody's attention to, because I just heard Administrator Carnahan talk about it a couple hours ago, is there's a whole bunch of things that are being done outside the scope of the FAR. So if I was a contracting officer, I'd be very aware of the new concrete and asphalt standards that GSA put forward last year. And so I'm imagining that more of that is coming. So I really would hope that the contracting officers are not doing the exact same work that they were doing 10 years ago now. We should be every single day thinking about smaller steps they could be taking to ingrain climate thinking into the work. That said, this is complicated stuff and we really want to get it right. So I don't want to lay all this onto them at once until we have figured out templates. I thought the concrete and asphalt standards were really simple and easy to implement. And that's what we're going to need in the early stages of this.
Mark, I see your hand's up. Go for it.
Yeah, this is related to the supply chain. And one of the big initiatives, obviously, is to migrate towards electric vehicles. Having said that, copper is essential to the manufacturer, and where they're looking is huge mines like the one in Chile. And the Germans are buying most of their copper from there right now. They're talking about reopening a mine. But the ones in foreign countries, they will say they meet all environmental standards, yet people are dying of cancer all around them because the water amounts and the lakes and the off-gassing is just horrible for those communities. And when they did a test to see about complaining, it didn't work. And there were no responses and there were no records of any complaints. So there's a lot of room for improvement in that area. I wondered if you'd run across that before. I think you hinted at it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you are alluding to, Mark, is a much bigger challenge for the federal government, for society as a whole, which is we live in a global economy with global supply chains, and everywhere we look, we're finding human rights abuses, incredible environmental abuses. And so we can't look at climate change in a silo, in an isolated case. We really need to think about how to integrate human rights and other key considerations into these decisions. So I do consider that to be fundamental to climate change work, is not to pretend like we can just have all these materials and not deal with human rights violations and massive toxic events and the like. And so I do think that's one of the things I'm really excited about with this administration. They are walking the talk. We're starting to see increasing attention to, in this country, oftentimes referred to as environmental justice considerations, but I consider it to be human rights. And so, yes, we should be calling attention to dirty methods of producing those materials for clean energy. And, what I'm really impressed by is the power of the market. I mean, I was just listening to some podcasts about storage and about batteries. And something, some of the worst abusers, we're just moving out of that metal completely. Cobalt, apparently we're not going to need cobalt pretty soon. We're finding new technologies to build batteries without cobalt. And that's going to be part of the solution too. It's, we have to, again, I want to repeat what I said earlier. I recognize that policy requires working on the margins, and this would be a big win to get this policy across, but this is no means the end point for the federal government to deal with its supply chain issues.
Thank you.
David.
Thank you. Hard to follow that, but I want to go back to comments sort of about how to implement. I'd like your view on using sort of the shadow pricing approach, maybe to phase in the ability to get the requirements in place in my view, that would say provide kind of advance notice. These things are coming. Maybe use the contracting process to take a survey of, do you have this? You'll need this in 2 years, or some way to acclimate them before the hammer comes down, so to speak, and as a requirement. But I think we could use the process itself to inform and to maybe even track, at least in a shadow way, if those are familiar with shadow pricing, sort of the impact of what these requirements would do.
Yeah, I have to say that is going to have to be part of it. So, I mean, again, this is all part about learning from the people who've been doing this already. And Microsoft, among other companies, have been leaders in using shadow carbon prices to drive internal changes. And so that might be something GAFAC wants to take a hard look at, is like, how can we, let's bring in some of these private sector leaders and say, how can we graft some of those solutions into the federal FAR regulations and other federal policies?
Thank you. Leslie, your turn.
Thanks, John. This has been really fascinating. So you mentioned earlier in your slides that this would apply to a very small percentage of the total kind of contractor population, especially smaller businesses that wouldn't be as affected. How are you getting, or how is this being received by those communities, even though it's not affecting them to the same extent? And do you see kind of potential down the line as we tackle the biggest companies? Do you see potential to kind of waterfall this down to some of the medium-sized firms, smaller firms, or just as the market shifts, drive that change?
Well, one thing about reviewing the comment file is I was surprised by how few commenters say we are federal contractors that would be captured by that dollar limit, but it was implicit in a good number of the letters, including major trade associations for defense and space industries. And I was pleasantly surprised. Now, there were some pretty strong opposition letters too, but we have a base of companies and trade associations right now that I'm hoping the federal government is calling up and saying, let's meet, let's get this thing done. The ones that want to be constructive, that need to have some changes, tweaks, or whatever, this is doable. I mean, I've been involved with a lot of environmental climate policy in my career, and I've seen people waste their time on things that were destined for failure. This one is not one of those. This thing is positioned for success. And it does require private sector engagement, obviously. And that's why I would be much more pessimistic if I had reviewed that comment file and the environmentalists were on one side and the companies were on another. This is not one of those cases. We have a lot of companies that want to demonstrate what they've been doing on disclosure and climate risk assessment and greenhouse gas emissions estimations and the like. Let's get them to the table and feed into this thing, and take what I would call best practice. Federal government should never be behind the private sector on best practice when it comes to managing climate risk. So let's figure out what that best practice is and basically graft that into the FAR.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, John. I think we have one more question from Steve.
So this is more of a constructive suggestion, and my guess is this is something you have in your pocket anyway. But I will say that I understand the reason why you want to say that it applies to a small percentage of contractors, but I dropped it into the chat. It seems to me that one of the important points is that small percentage of contracts eats up a bunch of the money in the pie. So, it seems to me that coverage without burden is really the message there, right? We're getting the big contractors that matter, we're getting the big contracts that matter, and we're not inconveniencing the small players. But
right, Steve, and that is a key message. And I have to say there were some opposition letters that were not exactly super candid on this point. I'm going to put it nicely by making it sound like this is a big attack on small businesses. Actually, in series comments and a few other comments, we essentially said, why is this, or even a category of so-called small businesses that are getting $50 million or more of business every year from the federal government? That's not a small business. Maybe the SBA defines it as such because they have a limited number of employees and they outsource most of their work, but that should be irrelevant. The real question, as you alluded to, is do you have the financial resources to do this essential homework? And I think anybody with $50 million worth of business from the federal government, at a very minimum, should do some basic homework assignment from their customer.
Actually, to follow up on that, John, is there any data? Do we have any idea what the actual cost is, what the cost of disclosure is, what the burden, the financial burden is? It's hard for me to wrap my head around, what those numbers might be in rough order of magnitude for any particular company.
I'm really glad you asked that, Luke, because I'm working with Series and other clients on SEC rules where a lot more work has been done around cost of disclosure. And so I would recommend certainly for the FAR Council to look at the filings in that record, as well as talking to SEC Division of Economic Research and Analysis. And there's other agencies too, not just in the US, but around the world that are basically trying to nail down that question. Big picture answer to your question is the disclosure industry, the many companies that are set up as experts on how to do this, inside companies and outside as consultants, has scaled dramatically in the past 3 or 5 years. And so whatever cost numbers might have existed 3 or 5 years ago are irrelevant. And whatever cost numbers that exist today are probably not a good indicator of where we're going to be a few years from now, because this area is moving fast.
Right. There'll probably be an app for it in a couple of years.
Right.
David, we'll take one more from David, and then we've got to move on. Go ahead, David.
This discussion made me think of the question of when a large company that might have to comply with the rule has subcontractors who by themselves would not have to apply with the rule. Is there kind of the hand in the glove kind of thing where small entities would have to essentially comply with the rule through a large entity that does? I mean, is that kind of what we're setting ourselves up for? And is that a barrier?
Are you referring to small entities that will be requested by large entities for their data to help the large entity answer their questions? Is that what you're alluding to? I'm sorry.
I'm thinking more, and someone correct me from GSA if I'm just have this wrong, is that if there is a large contractor that uses subs as part of their overall package, and those subs would not by themselves have to comply, but since it's the large entity that's representing the contract, does that sort of extend the requirements to those small entities, and is that a barrier?
Well, I have to say this has come up in the SEC context too, where people are saying you're imposing all kinds of costs on people who are not subject to this rule. It really is up to that reporting company, the big contractor, how they want to collect their data. And there's all kinds of industries that are set up for doing reasonable estimations, so you don't have to bug the little guy for data, which generally is not cost effective. So now, would I say that there'll never be a request of a subcontractor for data? I actually know some of these subcontractors are gigantic and have enormous carbon footprints and have enormous impact on the government's ability to function. But I think that the way this rule proposal handles that and the way we support is don't impose any rules on that. Let the contractor figure out how to present the information in an honest and fair way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, John, thank you. Thank you very much. Getting a standing ovation from Steve. We appreciate your time immensely. Thank you, Leslie, for bringing John to us. Very valuable insight. And I expect over the course of our term here, we will probably be calling you back for an update in the future. Always happy to come back. And I mentioned that analysis we just completed. I will just send that out to the email list that I was on earlier. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, all.
Okay. So we are going to move on to our next speaker today. This subcommittee's very own Mark Hayden. As you guys know, Mark has been a great contributor to our discussions and represents a perspective that we haven't really heard from here. Mark is currently the general counsel for the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance for the state of New Mexico, but he spent 8 years in state purchasing, 4 of them as a purchasing attorney, and another 4 as the New Mexico State Procurement Director. Mark is a seasoned professional when it comes to sustainability and procurement, and he's going to take us through and give us kind of the state perspective on sustainability and procurement and some of the great things that New Mexico has done. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that, Luke. In preparation for today, I wore my green shirt and my gorilla tie, but I really want to win over the hearts and souls of everyone with regard to sustainability. So I'll give you a little prelim here. I was on the Coalition for Sustainable Communities when we were told at my first meeting that there were 3 positions granted by Her Majesty to attend the 2021 Conference of Parties, also known as COP26 in Glasgow. So when I came back, I said, well, how do I relay this information to others in the state? And so I assembled a course to teach chief procurement officers, there's about 600 of them in New Mexico, about sustainable lessons learned, and teach it through the New Mexico State University. They have an EDGE program in Albuquerque, the biggest city in New Mexico. And they certify every 2 years. And the person that approves them is me, or was. So I said this would be a good thing to add to it. And the university agreed. I hadn't yet taught it, but you're going to see in this the slideshow some of the ideas I had about how I would approach it. And it's important only because when I went to a conference about a year ago, only 10 out of 200 purchasing agents in New Mexico, when I said, have you even thought about sustainability in your purchasing, only 10 out of 200 raised their hands. So I'm going to talk fast for the next 30 minutes or 28 or whatever I got left, with the goal of showing you content. We can always drill back, but I wanted people to have it. And I'll just hit the highlights until we get to the second half, where I'll drill down more on New Mexico and what we're doing. So with that said, next slide. So that's the advertising poster for 26. Next slide. That's who I went with, Beth Belhoff, who's in charge of the Santa Fe Sustainability Council and also the foundation. Next slide. This red area shows the production of CO2 in the world's atmosphere, and you can see it's all the first world countries, I would think, that are producing most of the fuel that generates the CO2, but China's among them as well. Next slide. From a satellite. This is a devastation. You never hear about December tornadoes in Kentucky, but now you see one here. You've seen a couple in the South recently. It just, really live indicators of what's happening out there. Next slide. You can see the glacier melt over the last, from 1941 is the left and 2004 is the right. It's all gone. And I hurried up to go to Glacier National Park so I can see them before they're gone. Next slide. Thwaites Glacier, Doomsday Glacier, that one's slated to fall into the sea shortly. And it's the size of Florida. When it does, sea levels are going to rise several feet. Next slide. This is the red areas are all where we have dead trees. The bark beetle's just been having a feast in the drought. New Mexico had the largest fire in history last year. And luckily we got a little more rain this year. But by now, all the trees are dead. And I saw Colorado, too, southern part, where just trees along the Continental Divide are just ready to get torched next lightning strike. Next slide. This talks about ocean acidification. And it just takes a small while for us to contaminate the oceans. But it takes almost 70,000 years to get rid of that acidification. And that's where we're sitting right now. So that's why you're seeing a lot of coral die-off and fish die-offs, in addition to overfishing and stuff that we're doing. Next slide. There's a lot of jokes out there, and they try to keep a light humor to it, but it is rather serious, and we're not working together like we should. Next slide. Kids were involved, and they put up a little protest, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Next slide, please. So what's going on? What's not going on? We're not meeting the goals. We're not even close. We may have hit the tipping point already. It doesn't look good, is what basically that slide says. Next slide. These were in the airports everywhere in Glasgow, and I was glad to see them because there is a lot of the elephant in the room that we don't talk about. At least some countries do. We don't. Next slide. More jokes, and insurance companies are no better. I went to an NAIC conference in Florida not too long ago and said, what are you doing? And they said, well, it's more frequent, more intense, so we're going to have to charge more premium. I said, that's your answer? So that's where they're headed. Next slide. Posters everywhere. Let's do something. Unfortunately, they did not. Next slide. I went and saw a protester who took off a week of time and left her child behind so that she can participate. And I found that even on the train station to the right. Next slide. This was a group of students who rated us on the Paris Accord. And if you see, we got a D on it. And I think that's probably generous. Next slide. This is a landscape at Glasgow when I was landing, and also when I was out touring the the peat bogs. Next slide. Yeah, peat can be used for a lot of things. I had some fun. But what I did find on the far left is that there's a lot of peat bogs up in the Arctic, and the methane release is blasting holes in the Arctic, which I wasn't quite aware of. But peat production is still alive in Glasgow for mostly the poorer sector, but it's a big contributor and it does smell. Next slide. This is where I stayed. Oh, I didn't realize I had an upside down picture. Sorry about that. But it took me an hour to get in, an hour to get down. There was only one train going each way each day. Next slide. Some of my observations about what's going on. I am a little more optimistic, I think, because the agencies throughout the federal government are actually cooperating. Per Biden, thou shalt coordinate information. You learn about batteries, you share it with all the labs. You work with industry. You actually have a mission now, and it's all a common mission. That was a big changer. And I'll get into this later, but BlackRock Retirement Fund is one of the big bucks out there promoting new projects. They're not gonna support anything if it doesn't have a positive environmental outcome. Next slide. What are the commitments, goals? I'll outline some of those. Next slide. So this is some of New Mexico's goals. I think they're pretty well, compared to a lot of states, they're pretty progressive. Look to your left, look to your right, look to the north, look to the south. We're one of the better states in the Southwest. Next slide. This is our governor, Michelle Lujan Glisham, giving a presentation at the U.S. Climate Action Center, well respected by COP26 members. Next slide. We're also part of a coalition with the it's called the United States Climate Alliance, but you can see Hawaii is worried about it. There's some other corners of the United States that are joining, and we're among people who are like-minded. Next slide. We did join the alliance. We had cabinet secretaries attend Glasgow, and we did adopt the strongest oil and gas release regulations in the nation, and now the feds are looking to us for how to do something similar. Next slide. 1.5 is the goal. It doesn't look too good. Next slide. So these are the nuts and bolts of what we do, and I'll get to that shortly. Energy transformation, let's look at options. Maybe we can build a hydrogen plane. Rolls-Royce already did it. Maybe we can build a hydrogen village. There's one in Glasgow, and there's also one in, I believe, the Emirates or Qatar. So let's demonstrate that somewhere in the US. We haven't done it yet. We're doing a lot of electric buses, trains, cars, trucks, so we're working on those. Window reflecting film, all the state buildings are being upgraded, HVAC systems, and preservation methods. Next slide. So this talks about some of the agreements. Those are positive. Enforcing those are always a trick, especially in third world countries. But we do have a lot of satellite surveillance, and we can track a lot of things. If there are goals that are being met and commitments, we can now verify. Next slide. These are more commitments. I mean, the automakers, as was pointed out earlier, I think by John, said that the combustion engine is dead. It is. And while I was there, they were announcing it with General Motors and Ford, and now Chrysler. Next slide. There were some good things I saw there, and everybody pretty much had the same message. So I really did like the feel I got from it. I want to see it in action is what I want to see next. Next slide. I met Amazon, I met the Congo. There was a lot of cooperation, but unless they're funded, they're not going to be able to carry out their mission. You know, trees are being cut down, warming of the bogs is happening. How do you make all this happen at a world scale? That's the trick. Next slide. A lot of H0 initiatives. I think the hub idea of New Mexico is not that good. We don't have all that water and you can't get green hydrogen. We don't want to strip it out of the natural gas. So I think we're not the best suited for that, but we can prove it works, especially with retrofitting the pipelines. Next slide. These are hydrogen buses and trucks. Next slide. There's earth moving equipment. The one on the right is pretty cool. That's a McLaren. It's a 4-wheel drive, kind of a racing vehicle, and it's hydrogen. Next slide. Hydrogen plane. Next slide. There's electric planes. Now that's not as viable because you can't stack enough batteries on a commercial liner to really make it viable. Next slide. There's a emergency vehicle with a plant that produces hydrogen. Next slide. Carbon capture and storage is another approach. I don't know how viable it is right now, but it's a thought. It's a step in the right direction. Next slide. Jaguar had a car that was pretty cool. In my juxtaposition here, I saw an old gas pump, and I said, this is the way of the future. Next slide. Bamboo bike, that was pretty cool. It's kind of like being on a carbon bike, only even lighter, and it soaks up all the vibrations. This was a sign on the right when I was leaving the airport. Next slide. So now we're getting to the blueprint. This was actually published at COP26. Next slide. And it talks about some of the things I touched on, but I'll drill down to New Mexico when we get there. Let's go next slide. This drills it down a little bit more to national, state, city actions, business actions, society actions. Next slide. Some more of the same for different area. Next slide. All-in strategy, that's what you really have to have is cooperation, at least within the US borders. Next slide. So what we've done here, at least up until now, we were working from home. That's all changed now. We're back. COVID's over apparently in New Mexico. Video conference bid openings, that was big because people used to have to travel 300 miles to visit. They don't anymore. We get more participation now than we did because it's on video. I thought that was a really good result and a take home. I think this should be modeled nationally. Paperless files. We used to have those big wheels on a moving shelf for all of our paper files. We got rid of everything. We had only submissions by electronic, only contracts by electronic. And after 7 years, I finally got DocuSign passed so we can do the e-signature launch. I just got a lot of resistance, but as soon as COVID hit, you never waste a pandemic. I switched everything over to electric and nobody said anything. Next slide. So there's sustainable procurements. I migrated another area where under their view, only wet signatures were allowed. They had paper on almost an entire floor of one building. I don't have any. Solar installations, I'll show a picture of that later on all state buildings. Next slide. So you can see the areas where we're touching the solar, the building envelopes, we're sealing it, we're putting some window film. HVAC updates, we're having those agreements where somebody comes in and says, we'll save you, $2 million over the next couple of years if you go with us and we do the upgrades. The water, we put little filters on everything, so it's reducing the flows. Toilet flushes, zero water toilets. Lighting is now LED. The transformers were from the mid 80s and they're now all upgraded. And all the buildings in Santa Fe for sure. And then we're trying to roll that out throughout the state. Next slide. This was in front of my building. This is the solar panel that we have that provides roughly 1/3 of the energy needs for 3 buildings. Including Department of Information Technology, which is a huge user of electricity. Next slide. Green Teams was this. I partnered with Arizona State University to get a master's student who would say, okay, these are the ways you can roll it out. I wish I could do it. I don't have that kind of time anymore, but Shirley was there and she offered to help with like 12 students offered to help New Mexico get on our feet and start doing sustainable procurements. And they mentioned green teams because you want to have that sustainable body. We talked about certifications. I think this is the type of thing that we want to have. So you have them embedded in all the purchasing areas whether you're at the federal or state level. I tried to roll some of this out, as I mentioned before, and it got only so far. But I think collaboration with the universities and the labs and the National Association of State Procurement Officials is another great way for the federal government to roll things out to the states, because they're all members. Next slide. We're trying to purchase more electric vehicles. I had unfortunately a saga where I was in a Chevy Bolt that could only be a stage 2 charge, and it would take me 3 days, and I didn't get home with the vehicle I took out because nobody said it couldn't be fast charged. Next slide. That's the car. We'll flip through a bunch of these. Next slide. And next. Next. It's a sad story. Next. Next. So this clean bus program was pretty cool, but here's the problem we had at the local level. Locals in New Mexico, even at the state level, we struggle, but at the local level for sure, they have 2 people in the office, and they're not grant writers, they're not procurement people, they're not project managers, and they're not reporters for telling the federal government where the money goes. So having these available doesn't help them if the grant money's flowing down because they don't do anything with it. You have to operate it from the state level, and we don't have enough resources. And besides that, you have to front a lot of the money, and it may not come for a year. You need to have that pool of money that you can use and have it cycle so that you're not burdening multi-million dollars on local governments. Next slide. I'm going to just buzz through this whole bus section. So next slide. Next slide. You can see charging stations at every state building in Santa Fe. We now have level 3. I'll get into NEVI next. Next slide. I'll say this now. One of the problems is you have to work with the power companies, but when you dig, you can't just dig for power line. You also have to dig for broadband because you can't find them, you can't pay for them, you can't see if they're occupied, and you can't maintain them. So that's a big problem in New Mexico and any other state that has wide open spaces. Next slide. That's our map. If somebody put push pins in there and says, okay, we got NEVI, we got 50 miles, we got charging stations, but a lot of those are in areas that have no power and no broadband. Next slide. We were the first one to submit a plan, but we got to make it happen. And just about the time I thought I was getting traction, the people that were part of my team left, and now we're left without a lot of momentum. Next slide. There's some guidance here for where we need to go with the grant funding. There's a lot of information sent from the governor's office, but not a lot of it that's being implemented. Next slide. I think the idea is you have this global goal of 1.5, and then you roll it out to the United States, and then you roll it out to the individual states, and then you roll it out to the local state, the local governments within the state. That's how it has to happen. And I think we can get there, but we have a ways to go. Next slide. One of the things I found kind of fascinating was if you're at the state, you say, well, we're just a pass through for the money. We're going to throw it to the locals to figure it out. But they don't have the procurement expertise to make it NEVI compliant. And I soon found that out, and I offered to do it for them. I was the first one to have a National Association of State Procurement Official request that the national level put out NEVI compliant chargers, broadband implementation, and power. Next slide. Next slide. This is a little more about the procurement. This is more procurement related things. Next slide. Yeah, the broadband was the big trip up here, and we're still not, we're a long way to go. We already been through a pandemic, and the kids still don't have broadband. Next slide. So I offered to talk to any local governments about this, and I was part of a road show that went to various places throughout New Mexico, and they all had the same complaints. So until the state really has those resources, and I'll tell you what, my retirement plan is to offer grant writing, procurement, project management, and reporting to the federal government, because everybody needs this. 50 states are all clamoring for this right now. Next slide. We have a commitment from our governor to go this direction. We were instructed to buy the cars. Unfortunately, we're not buying the right ones, and they're not available. Next slide. Next slide. We're part of a national consortium to put this in on a corridor, mountain corridor. We have a zero emission bus project that's underway, but it gets a little tricky. What you don't want is a headline saying that it's full of 50 kids is stalled because it doesn't have battery power. You got to really go out there and test it, and you got to partner with a counselor or some kind of a evaluator to say, okay, this can happen successfully, because if it doesn't, it can backfire in a bad way. Next slide. Next slide. That's some of the real buses that we have. Next slide. You can see the routes. They're pretty expansive, and they're in cold areas and high altitude, and they don't work exactly the way the manufacturer would hope. Next slide. We passed a lot of bills, but not all of them passed, and it's not all coordinated. I tried to champion some of them, but it's an arduous process, and we only go either 30 days or 60 days on altering years. Next slide. Next slide. This just goes through some of the types of legislation we're looking at. We did have New Mexico's first climate summit. That was pretty exciting. I attended that one. Next slide. You learn from each other when you do that. And you can see some of the speakers. Next slide. This is hats off to Shirley over at Arizona State. Wonderful person. Next slide. These are partnerships, things that you can do to incentivize within the state governments. Next slide. The Jicarilla Pueblo is pretty amazing. They got over 1,000 acres under solar already. They're planning to do another solar, 1,000 acres, and we have windmill farms in the south. So we're migrating that way, even though we are considered an oil and gas state with the Permian Basin. Next slide. So I had some recap on it. Next slide. And I give some information on trying to get more information. Next slide. That's me at the end of the COP26. I'm holding up the globe. I need help. All right, that's it. Questions?
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. There were some doubters that didn't think you'd be able to get through 90 slides in 30 minutes. But you set the doubters wrong. So
I'm known as the closer, Luke.
Well done. Well done. Well done. So I guess I'll start. I find that, working in state government, I'm kind of in awe at the rulemaking process here and the policy making process on the federal level, and the number of hands involved. And I miss my day job sometimes, and sometimes we just need a handful of people around a table to say, what's a good policy? How can we approach this? How can we change some evaluation criteria? And what can we do to make this more sustainable without having to go to, Congress or an executive order? What has been your experience in actually integrating kind of sustainable procurement on the micro level? Like, have you been able to incorporate criteria in the evaluation process, or is it more like requirements driven? And are there any reporting obligations like post-award that have come out of your efforts?
Boy, I got to say, I think Albuquerque is trying to get there, and they have a little more autonomy as I'm trying to remember the name of their they're autonomous in terms of how they can roll out procurement. So in doing that, they're trying to put a little bit of parameter around it. Like, for instance, the default is you have to buy local. Local means within the city of Albuquerque, unless you have a memo to the file that says you can't. So that's one way of really filtering it out. I tried to do something on the state level to say you have to buy within New Mexico as a criteria, and that legislation was turned down. So the next thing I could do is say, well, if I give them a certain number of points, let's say if I weighed in New Mexico /local with more points, that might favor New Mexico production. But even on the food industries where you have it for the hospital system or you have it for the correction system, I couldn't go out and just say, I want New Mexico. You have to work through Cisco, Canteen, Shamrock, and have them fill their needs locally. And I never got that far. I didn't stick around long enough. This stuff is just taking so incredibly long. You can't flip a switch and do stuff quickly like I did with the procurement in the COVID pandemic. So unfortunately, I am struggling trying to get things done. I am alone. Most of the people are counting the days to retirement and they don't want to stick their nose out. And instead, they just buy the cheapest thing they can find and nobody complains. And there is no policy from the governor or anywhere else that says you have to do it. So nobody will.
Well, you have an opportunity to do it here on the federal level. So
Thank you for that.
That's off
You
to
guys
you.
lead the way.
All right. Steve.
So first, let me say thanks for the wonderful presentation and thanks for the energy and all of the efforts there as well.
I had to do it in 30 minutes, Steve.
I think I have two separate types of questions. The one is, my takeaway from your presentation is you adopt in many ways where my instinct goes, the all hands on deck approach. We're dealing with a crisis. We're going to try everything and we'll try to get there a million different ways. As you've heard in our work on the committee, there are many who believe we should figure out where the greatest points of impact are, put all of our energy there, and not worry about the margin. So I'm kind of curious conceptually to hear your reaction as to, everything all at once or a few things first. That's one. The other question is, again, you're just following John Kostiak's presentation, and we've got the big federal rule. What I didn't hear you talking about was scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, assessment, disclosure, and targeting rubrics. And the question that I guess I have for you is, if the United States federal government did this, would you find this to be a powerful tool? Is it parallel play? Is it irrelevant? Anyway, any thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, first one, I think the governor would agree on this one, the buckshot approach, everything at once, you don't know what's going to work. And hopefully something will get traction. You just throw it all in the hopper at the same time and see what comes out. That's our approach. The second thing about if the federal government did it, could we adopt it? Anytime a state can point to the federal government, it's a better position. I'll give you an example. If I've got an inkling to buy electric vehicles because I think they're going to last longer, they're not going to require a lot of maintenance, you don't have a lot of emissions, I can't do it, because if I buy a Lightning, it's not going to be 30,000, it's going to be closer to 50, 60, 70. And then I have to justify that purchase. And people are going to say, well, look, the state's wasting money on very expensive cars. I know New York did an example, I think the E-Mustang or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. But if there are more studies out there like that, that said, this is the way, this is the path, this is what the states need to do from the federal government, I think it'd be a lot easier for us to justify it. If I say it, it's like, oh, Hayden wants to drive a Tesla. Nobody would believe me. I have to point to somebody else. So yes, it would help.
So a quick follow-up on that second point. One thing that we've danced around a number of times, you and on both of the subcommittees, is expansion of the cooperative purchasing rubric, particularly for the environmental aisle and things like that. I mean, what I hear you saying is, if you had access through the federal supply schedule, through cooperative purchasing, and this stuff was on an approved list, in effect, it not only saves you time and effort, but it deals with some of the fallout from you as well. I mean, is it worth the candle?
Stephen, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Anytime a state doesn't have to do a procurement, we all dance. So if the federal government's had those out there, and by the way, New Mexico, not all states have this, but we have the right to adopt a GSA form or a GSA purchasing package, whatever it is. And I would love to do that across the board for cars, for charging stations, for broadband equipment. I would love to have that at my fingertips because number one, I don't have to do it. And number two, it's pretty standardized throughout the country and it's already been tested and approved. I love the idea.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I mean, at the state level, the ability to utilize GSA schedules and GSA existing awards to make our own awards is it's invaluable. And if there was if when we are selecting options, if there is a green option for something and they have a GSA schedule, or there's a clear, quick way for me to identify the greenest option from a GSA schedule, that would take us a long way through our normal decision making to making the most sustainable procurement decision. I think it's a great area we should touch upon, however we can incorporate it.
And Luke, to kind of take that one step further, I want to take all the thinking out of procurement, just hit a button and have the algorithm spit out what I need. That's the easiest way to do it. So yeah, let's see if we can get there.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, it looks like that's it. We won't be losing Mark. We'll have Mark here for questions anytime we need him. Thank you very much, Mark.
You're welcome.
Really-
On time and under budget, just for the record.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think we're going to transition now to the next part of our agenda here. More administrative matters. I think given we have some time, we're going to get a report out from our task group, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the recommendations that we haven't finalized or clued in on too much. So why don't we start with the single-use plastics task group report out? I know we had a rotating list of attendees. I'm not sure who you guys selected to do the report.
Hey everyone.
Thank you, Anish.
I can give a kind of a brief overview, and then David, feel free to chime in. I think Jenny's on, but is listening in today.
Great, thank you both.
So we've been working over the past few weeks on developing a draft of our recommendations. And I can share my screen and give a brief preview of it. In terms of a timeline, I think it was suggested that like 2 weeks from now, we would have a more polished version to share with this group to get comments from you all. But I'll just share my screen and provide kind of an overview of what this document is looking like in case folks have any high level thoughts to share. And then we can go from there. So is it pretty small, or should I zoom in?
No, we can see it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I can see it. And I think just to be clear, the group will have an opportunity to comment on it. But that'll be kind of at the conclusion of the next 2 weeks when you guys finalize, we'll say the first final draft.
And Anish, if you can on your screen, just grab the little bar down at the bottom and push it all the way to the left, because we're losing a little bit of the left margin and we don't really need the comment bubbles on the right.
I see. I got
go
you.
the other way.
Yeah, I gotcha. Oh, for some reason it won't. Let me do this. There we go. Is that better? No?
Yes, that's good. I can see the whole thing now. Yep.
Great. Yeah, and I won't be just like going through it. And I wanted to just go over a few kind of salient points, just the overall kind of outline. So there's some overview, some links to existing resources. And then we get into our recommendation section, which includes just a brief framing of the problem. And then what we've been developing is a list of strategies. And so I'll pause here because this is how we're organizing the strategies. So there's specific categories to address this issue. There are product categories when we talk about procurement. So that's another way of organizing it. And then the third is in terms of spurring action at GSA, where the next step lies. So a lot of this would be going ultimately to rulemaking, but we do want to have some immediate next steps. So we've also highlighted ones that are good for piloting by procurement officers, and for some of them that are more system oriented, they could be piloted at facilities. So we can work on like the language of that and look forward to your feedback there. But that's how we're organizing our recommendations. And then this is kind of a table, which I think will best not to go through in detail now, but just so you have kind of context for how we're laying it out, so we can sort it in different ways by what the next step is, what that category is in terms of procurement, and what the recommended strategy is. So yeah, I think I'll just pause there. David, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, just I want to thank you and Jenny. You did a lot of the let's say text production from your own work, so I certainly appreciate that. As someone that's in the recycling industry, sometimes we have a different view of things, and unfortunately I had only time today to put some comments in, so there's suggestions for your consideration. But I think my view of it is, I think we have everything we want to say. We just have to figure out the best way to present it, and that's kind of my view of it. I don't know if you and Jenny would concur with that. I think we have all the elements there. It's just a matter of, I think, presentation and putting it within the 3-page limit that we have at the correct font size and everything else.
Hey, David, let me say a word about that. And Boris, right here. It's just that you also have the opportunity to use an appendix. If you like the 3 pages kind of gets the storyline, but then you can definitely use an appendix to expand on if you have some resources, which would be very helpful. So just wanted to put that out there. I don't know, Stephanie, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
No, I don't think I have any additional, and I think as they are doing, they can include those links and things like that would help as well. But I'm sure that also, not trying to get off subject, but we do have other members that are on other subcommittees. Could you, if either one of you could discuss your collaboration efforts and how that's been working, that might be helpful to others.
So I think it's perhaps a little bit informal. Also serving in the industrial partnership, at least my view of my role is to kind of stay in the lane and make sure that what we do isn't encroaching on it, but supports other things that are happening in the industrial partnership sector side of what we're doing, so that they're complementary and not conflicting and not competing to the extent that we can. So that's kind of my view of how we're trying to coordinate with other parts of the GAP FAC. And I think the same is true of acquisition workforce, except I'm not the link to that since I'm not on that particular subcommittee.
Nigel, I saw a standing list.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And related to that, with David, who's also on that industry outreach subcommittee with me. I think with that last section, Anish, that you had on the screen around the single-use plastics piece, I was doing some research, and David, I sent this over to you guys.
I saw it. Yeah.
If you could take a look at the document that I put in, it's not a document, it's just me pulling together some of my notes. But I was doing some research on what the best plant-based packaging materials and stuff, and kept pulling up information on industrial hemp and the 2018 Farm Bill that allowed that to go through. There's a lot of opportunity to check a number of boxes in that category of packaging material. And so as we're going through this, consider the opportunity to really not just enhance the climate change and sustainability, but really put a shot in the arm of some burgeoning industries like paper products and other products that are coming from things like hemp. The federal government through the Department of Agriculture, and there are a bunch of links in there in that document, have a really established program trying to promote industrial hemp, particularly in areas of really dry rural areas and underserved communities, Appalachian areas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and so forth. It is a high yield plant that apparently it captures more carbon than most others that aren't like giant sequoias, which was amazing to me. The potential there is significant, and it would help really put energy behind another program that the federal government's already created. And then as we're also thinking about DEI and inclusion, again, these are things that have really been targeted towards potentially helping out communities that have been left behind. There are a couple different HBCUs that are already doing Department of Agriculture and federally funded research on industrial hemp for everything from plastics to concrete, everything in between. And there are also some initiatives around the Black farmers that I don't know if you guys know, there's been a lot of history there with Black farmers and lawsuits on discrimination from the federal government, as well as underserved communities in, again, like Appalachian area, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri area. So please take a look at that and consider that we could be, if we target this recommendation correctly around the single-use plastics, if the question is then what do we replace it with? Well, we have an opportunity to replace it with something that the federal government is already identified as a real opportunity and growth area.
Yeah, those sound like very interesting considerations to incorporate if we can make that work somehow. Mark, you got your hand up.
Thank you for that, Luke. I want to tag team some of the comments by Nigel. Hemp is just incredible in terms of its cellulose production. It grows quick. There's lots of it, and it doesn't get any drier than New Mexico. So I think those type of opportunities, especially for indigenous tribes, we have about 29 pueblos that could potentially be growing it here. Water could be an issue. That's something we haven't really explored, but I like the way it's going. And secondly, if livestock is part of the U.S. supply chain and you have to feed the livestock, boy, they love composted hemp. It's just an amazing food source. So give that some thought as well. Thanks.
Thanks,
Very
folks. Those are great suggestions, and we have a section on piloting compostable materials, and so we'll add that as an opportunity in that section.
Terrific.
Just in reference, and Nigel, thank you for pointing that out to me the other day. I did see it in the in our folder, and I haven't had a chance to drink deeply from that document. I would think that perhaps some of the other attributes that are rendering as or articulating as important for the providers of hemp could have an LCA or other things that would support decision making, further encouraging the use of that. I think there are opportunities to get some of those metrics and to use them alongside with other things that we are thinking about recommending. So I think it can play out not only in the single-use plastics, but in other places as well.
I think that's great. I think this could be an educational opportunity way down the supply chain.
Okay, that's a wonderful report out. Are there any final comments for this subtask group, single-use plastics?
This is Jenny. Sorry, I'm just getting back from traveling. But I will say that I think we're pretty close, but I think we just want to have a cohesive document before we go about sharing. And if it makes sense to share with the other co-chairs before sharing with the group on something we can talk about, or just share with the full group. But yeah, looking forward to getting it to everyone.
Great. I think you're more than close. It really is. You guys have come a long way. It's a fantastic document. as is. Really looking forward to the next delivery. So that'll be in about 2 weeks, I think you said. That would give us, the committee, a little more than 2 weeks to review and comment. I think, we'll see how the timing works out, but my guess is we'll probably get it for comment and then have maybe one opportunity to discuss at either an administrative meeting or a public meeting what our input and what our comments are. So I guess when that does come, we'll probably have to ask folks to take a look at it between meetings, insert their comments, and be ready to talk about it at the next meeting. Steve, you want to add something?
Yeah,
Hey, look,
and
before we
Yeah.
go there, hey, Steve, before we go there, just talk about process a little bit. So we intend to have all 3 subcommittees be able to share their drafts. So the other subcommittees are working on those lanes with everybody. So you all have a chance to, so the eyes of the other GAFAP members will be on this document.
Great.
When you have it. So that's our plan. So there'll be no surprises. Everybody gets to see everything. So just want to put that out there.
yeah.
But I think we should have this committee's input before it goes to the other subcommittees, correct?
That would be ideal. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Stephanie and I are in sync on that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, my sense is that based on what Luke and Boris have just said is what we will be circulating it amongst ourselves, but we may ask to convene the group in a more truncated way than we normally would, but that would obviously be for a very small process. But I'm assuming based on the schedule, most of that's going to have to be through email. But
Okay. Okay. Thank you guys again. Really appreciate it. The next topic I wanted to touch on briefly is the recommendation 1. Again, this is the technology tools recommendation and the kind of global look at existing tools and how they may function better together or more cohesively. I think we've been trying to gear up a couple of guests for our administrative meeting next week that can hopefully offer some insight in the environmental aisle and SF tool. Is that right, Boris? I'm not sure if we've been able to confirm those folks.
Not confirmed, but that's the plan. Yeah. We're trying to get some GSA experts that are swimming in that space of the systems side of things.
Okay, great. So I think we've heard it from virtually every speaker that there's an opportunity here. And I think next week we'll hear from the experts, and then maybe we'll be able to better formulate a recommendation, whether it's tight or broad. I'm not sure. My own thoughts on that. But we did have some volunteers at our last meeting, Amlan and Stacy, who would like to be part of the subtask group that takes a look at that. Not that needs to be formed today, but something to consider, and perhaps next time when we meet, if there are any other volunteers that want to be part of that, I think that will be maybe the next one to crystallize and be a kind of a scope of work for us to focus on. The second 2 recommendations are the ones I think I'd like to kick back to this group, because I do struggle myself with trying to figure out where to take them. That's recommendation 2, to improve procurement decision framework to include measurement through sustainability scorecards. And recommendation 3, centralize education resources and best practices and streamline access to this information. They seem to be 2 different things, and I'm not sure, where to go from here, who to call to speak, where we can take a deeper dive to get a better understanding of what the issues are. I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious if the authors of either one of those 2 might better be able to articulate what their thinking was. Or Steve, you've got a perspective on it yourself.
Hey, Nigel, I'm looking at Nigel. I'm talking to Luke Bassis. Look,
Yes.
a comment about the industry partnership subcommittee, and Nigel and David, feel free to add here. So we had a discussion yesterday on the recommendations that subcommittee is going to focus on. And one of there are actually 2 areas, but one of the areas is going to be a maturity model, a climate sustainability risk maturity model. So I think there are some components there of measurement There are some components there of just tracking progress and kind of laying a roadmap for the supplier base. So that could potentially have a connection to these two other areas here, but I did want to put that out there. I don't know if either David or Nigel want to say more about that. So that's one area that subcommittee is going to be very focused on over the next couple of weeks. So there definitely is a little bit of connection to what you're talking about here, because it's about really equipping the supplier base to deal with sustainable acquisition.
Right. And I think what I recall as being the nexus of this for us was the evaluation process. Like, what are we doing during the procurement process? Is it evaluation criteria? Is it prerequisites? Is it some sort of scoring rubric? Is it a pass fail? I feel like there's a big bucket here that we were thinking about that maybe these words don't necessarily reflect. So maybe this is just something we've got to take up with a deeper dive discussion. Go ahead, Steve, please.
Yeah, and maybe another way to think of it is, I mean, I think we have to be pleased that with the task force, it looks like we're going to have something to offer when the big group comes together in May. Okay, so, one thing that we were trying to do from the beginning is have that quick win. Okay, so let's assume that we're putting that in our category if that's where we're the most advanced. The next issue, we've got speakers coming, and I think there's a fair amount of cohesion as to what the topics might be. But looking down the road, I think to Luke's point, what we really want to be doing is trying to get a sense of who wants to drive those trades, what they most want to get out of it, and where they think the big return on investment is. So if you're looking at recommendations 3 and 4, or topics 3 and 4, and you're feeling like that was something that you were emotionally vested in, make sure that we know that this is something you want to be involved in, and be as specific as possible as to where you think the potential strains are. And going back to what we were talking about before, possibly give us some ideas as to who might be informative on that, including members of our own subcommittee or the larger committee. So that's kind of what I would hope people are doing in the next few weeks, even though we're going to be asking you to do other things as well.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Better said than I could have done. Okay. I think the last order of business we wanted to just note, we are looking to bring in the private sector perspective. Dr. Kim White has put together some questions, because I think this was raised at our last administrative meeting, which we've modified and contributed and have added to the share drive. So please take a look and comment. And I think by next week, we want to potentially be able to use them as a basis for conversations, just to scope out potential private sector speakers for this subcommittee. Both, I would say, in the corporate, it would be great if we could get a chief sustainability officer or a chief procurement officer who's got accomplishments in this space, so we can really dig deep. Or in the alternative, the kind of consultants that operate in that area where they help the chief sustainability officer achieve these goals. And so the tools that they bring to the table and what they might be able to contribute or share as far as best practices and tools go with us. So if you folks could take a look at that, I'd appreciate it. Dr. White did a great job, and we've got that document in the share drive. That was all I had for administrative matters. I don't know, Steve, if you've got anything else.
I think we're rapidly approaching that time when we're supposed to open it up for public. And I was actually intrigued earlier. It looked like we might have had some outsiders, but maybe not.
Yeah, we do have a couple of folks. Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah, go ahead.
So, yes, so we do have a couple of folks at this time. If you would like, this is the time that we do open for public comments. If we have anyone at this time who would like to address the committee or share any thoughts, at this time, this will be your time to do so. If you could please just raise your hand, Luke or Steve will call upon you. Okay, Luke, it seems at this time we have no one, so I'll yield back your time.
Okay, terrific. I did not have anything else on the agenda, so unless Steve, Boris, or Stephanie, or anybody else wants to make a final comment, we may have a few minutes back to our day. Steve?
And the only thing that I want to reiterate is, again, thanks in particular to the task group for driving things ahead. Thanks to Luke for all the extra work that he's been putting in. Great to hear from Mark and members of the committee who wish to speak, but it does look like we do potentially have one comment, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Bill Garrett. I just wanted to chime in real quick. I work at GSA in the, I'm director of the Personal Property Management Policy Office. I just had a conversation this past week with Boris. I was connected with him because we are researching various ways to improve communication across the federal government regarding excess federal government property. As you may know, that's the first source of procurement. Some agencies do a good job with that and some do not. So we heard of this committee and we are connected with Boris, and it's been really fascinating just this afternoon hearing the conversation, and I look forward to participating going forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, any final thoughts? All right, so this here concludes the March 30th subcommittee meeting. Thank you guys very much, and we will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
All right. This is a reminder to the public that comments and suggestions can be submitted to regulation.gov, and we wish you all a great rest of your day. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.